All right. So I think that we're live and I'm unmuted. So hello and welcome everybody to our panel discussion, Asian Representation, Sustaining the Momentum. In a post-Crazy Rich Asians world, there has been a notable upswing in Asian representation in film, TV, and media. And today, our diverse panelists will be sharing their thoughts on how we can sustain this momentum into the future while also pushing for quality representation. And I say quality to mean representation that is authentic to the Asian experience and voice and is not reductive and does not perpetuate harmful stereotypes or tropes. And this panel is made possible by Eliminate Hate, the advocacy arm of the Vancouver Asian Film Festival, of which I am an ambassador. And Eliminate Hate seeks to educate and empower people to eliminate racism against Asian Canadians through arts, film, and media. And over the coming months, Eliminate Hate intends to continue this dialogue around quality Asian Canadian representation in the arts. So be sure to follow them on social media for future workshops and calls to action. So to introduce myself, my name is Zoe C, and I'm your moderator today. And I'm a cartoonist and an illustrator and a former lawyer here in Vancouver, BC. I'd like to acknowledge that I'm coming to you from the traditional and unceded territories of the Squamish, Tsleil-Waututh, and Musqueam First Nations. And I'm really excited to talk to our panel of creatives. And I'll introduce them one by one. Erin Au is the Director of Production and Development at Bright Light Pictures. Pardon me. Aaron is a Chinese-born Canadian who started his film career in 1998 as an actor and a stuntman, before moving into production in 2008. Since then, he's produced everything from indie features to network series, with his most recent credit being Firefly Lane for Netflix. So Aaron, could you give us a wave so we know who you are? Awesome. All right, next we have Abu Bakr Khan, who is the CEO of Diaspora Creative, a production company based in Vancouver, Canada. He has produced several short films and is the vice chair of the BC branch of the Canadian Media Producers Association. And he is a recent graduate of the Canadian Film Centre's Producers Lab. Currently, he is producing an episodic documentary series, Lions Rise, and working on 2 feature films that are in development. So, Abu Bakr, can you give us a wave? Awesome. Next, we have Lisa Kyonya Parsons, who is a Korean-American comedy writer who has written for several award-winning TV shows over the years, including Arrested Development, It's Always Sunny in Philadelphia, Everybody Hates Chris, Beta's Insatiable, and many more. Currently, she is a writer and co-executive producer on the upcoming Disney show Ultraviolet and the Black Scorpion, pardon me. She also wrote the Hallmark Channel's first Christmas movie featuring a Korean-American lead, Boyfriends of Christmas Past, which is airing this holiday season, which I'm super excited about. And last but not least, Mi Jung Lee is a journalist and co-anchor of CTV News at 6. When she began her career in 1990, she was the first Korean-Canadian newscaster on the air in BC, and one of only a few Asian Canadians on the air in Canada at the time. She regularly gives back to her community through her support of local charities and organizations, and speaks frequently about her journey as a cancer survivor to raise funds for cancer research. So thank you all, and that's me, John. Yes, thank you all for joining me today. I think it's great that we have panelists today who can speak from their perspectives in all of these different areas of media. Acting, production, writing, journalism, and for me, publishing, cartooning. So to start us off, I wanted to talk about how things may have changed in the industry over the past couple of decades. So I'm relatively new to all this. I only started in publishing a few years ago when Me Too and representation was very much more of a conversation. So that's been great to see. But of course, I recall that growing up, media was overwhelmingly white or like kung fu movies, and there wasn't much to it. And I think that it's really only recently that I and my friends and colleagues have kind of gained the ability to kind of see past that and expect more. So I was hoping to start with Aaron. When you got your start in 1998, you talk about what your experiences with representation and opportunities, to like represent Asian people back then. How was that, and how has it shifted over time for you?
Yeah, it's very different now compared to back then. Starting as an actor and a stunt guy back then, my resume and for a decade or so after that was playing ninja number one and gangster number one and two and three and you name it, my resume's got the numbers of those roles. um and part of the reason that got me out of doing that was the realization that I was just helping perpetuate the stereotypes, and it was super frustrating. So as a storyteller myself, I really wanted to go out and write my own content and make my own projects and tell my story. But even back then, I couldn't find anybody to produce me, and I just wanted to be a writer director. So eventually, I had to learn how to produce myself, and I produced my own short. I did a couple, and then luckily for me, my films did well in the festivals and stuff. And a local production company caught wind of me, and they brought me in to help produce some of their content. And with that company, we did a couple of short films, a couple features, a couple web series, and I kind of used that as a building, to build my career and go further. And then I had the opportunity to join Brightlight, which is, so I started on this journey of kind of there wasn't representation and there wasn't opportunity. So for me, it was finding a way in so that I could be in a place where I could give those opportunities. And it has been a, 10-15 year journey of getting to a place where I can say, okay, let's develop a project about, a group of young Asian Canadians, and let's, hire a Taiwanese Canadian director for this movie. And, so for me, like, yes, the landscape has definitely changed, but it was something that I felt that, you know, luckily we have, Crazy Rich Asians and Fresh Off the Boat and that kind of stuff that has changed the landscape. But if it hadn't changed the landscape, then I was, seeking to try and change the landscape from the inside, essentially.
Hmm. Yeah, and that's I guess like another question that I wanted to talk about more widely later on was this kind of like I guess it feels sudden that there's all these movies that have come out in the kind of past couple of years, like the Crazy Rich Asians and the Shang-Chi and the Minari, that kind of like center Asian people and Asian stories. So, what did you kind of feel any rumblings about that, like from your position in the industry, or like did that take you by surprise? How did you feel about that when it started happening?
I think really Crazy Rich Asians is the one that really broke the mold. And mainly because it's a story about love and family and people. It's not a story about being Asian. It just happens that the cast are Asian and that story and those cultures are Asian. You can take that great script and change the ethnicities, and it still can be relatable, and it still could have been great. Um, but again, there is nuances of the Asian cultures that helped that story. So I think really that kind of made Hollywood specifically go, huh, now we don't need, superstars to have a hit. And people are interested in stories. And then, it slowly opens the door. And then, more things like Parasite and Minari, they slowly open the door further and further. And each inch it opens, it allows somebody else to step in and somebody else to step up. And it's that slow inching battle that we're all fighting, um, you know, that's really going to help us. And that's kind of one of the things that we got to realize is that we're not going to change the world overnight. But every time they give us that inch, we have to push for that next inch.
Yeah, I think that's for sure, and I guess that's something that we've noticed with these movies is like they don't have Asian characters because it's like a uniquely Asian story that's told in China or something. It's just like regular people who we know who just happen to have interesting stories and who happen to be. All right, awesome. So I also wanted to ask Mi Jung about her experiences. So clearly, so you are in journalism media, which is, a completely different arena from film and TV. But I'm really interested in in your experience entering this, like, very public facing area in 1990 when you got your start, and what challenges you faced, and what changes you've seen since then.
Yeah, I think like what you mentioned, growing up in Vancouver, there weren't a lot of Asian people in the news. And growing up, I don't think I ever imagined I could be in the news because I never saw anyone that looked like me on television. So I think it is true to actualize, to visualize is to actualize. Like when you can see something like that, you can kind of imagine yourself in that position. But luckily, my mom said, well, why don't you try journalism school? So I did. So it wasn't even my idea, but um, so always listen to your Korean mother. So I went into journalism when there weren't a lot of people in the field. But I have to say, I think news media tried to get more diversity earlier than entertainment because they want to reflect the audience of the community. Not that they always got it right, but I think we've been kind of doing it for a little longer than perhaps mainstream entertainment has. So, but I do distinctly remember early in my career that one of my colleagues said, oh, and there was a bit of an affirmative action movement a little bit back then in the 90s. And he actually said to me, oh, well, we know, Mi Jung, you're hired because you're a visible minority and we're trying to get more visible minorities. And I thought, whoa, okay. I was really young then. I was speechless. I did not know what to say, but he was suggesting I was just the token vis min. And thinking back to that, I really, it really does make you doubt whether you should be in that position, whether you deserve that job. And being a young reporter, already insecure enough, that just fueled the insecurity even more. But I made a point of talking to the person who hired me, the GM, and I said, why did you hire me? And I knew, though, in the deep down, that I had really hustled for this job and really worked hard to get the job. And he confirmed to me that, yeah, I deserved the job. And so I think we have to banish these feelings of inferiority and that we don't belong at the table. Like we have to tell ourselves, yeah, we deserve to be here. We deserve this job and we deserve to be at the table, and not to not to be plagued by self-doubt or second guessing why you have this position. No, nobody has any more entitlement to any other person because of their color of skin. So I think as Asians, sometimes are a little bit maybe self-doubting. So I think that was something that I learned, that just banish those thoughts of inferiority, and our stories matter, and our stories are just as valid as anybody else's stories. So we need to start changing our mindset about that. And I think that's something that I learned from my early experience as a journalist. But I think representation is key, yes, because it does, inspire other young people to get into it. But editorially, from a newsroom position, you can't just have the faces. You do have to have the leadership to say, we are going to pursue stories, because one reporter is just one person and they can only do so much. But if it comes from top down, and that there is a feeling that we do want to pursue these stories that affect the BIPOC community, I think that's really important too. So I think the representation has to go beyond reporters. It has to get into the upper echelons of management as well. And that's something where I'd like to see a lot more growth, that we see more leaders, like Asian leaders at the top, not just Asian reporters or anchors. Like you were saying, Aaron, you need to be able to guide the story. You need to be able to come up with the story. And that comes often from above. And there has to be that safe space, or that direction, to pursue the kind of stories that reflect the diverse community that we live in.
Yeah, and that's something that has really been top of mind, of course, like in this past year, with the past couple of years, with like all of the like the incidents of like anti-Asian racism, which has been super troubling to hear about. But I was thinking about how you really do need people with that lived experience if you want to report on it sensitively and like accurately. Like, you know, there's only so much that you can that you can convey from secondhand experience, I think.
Yeah.
So yeah, I think that's super important. And just, you know, going off of what Aaron was saying as well, I think that there is so much of feeling amongst, you know, Asians and other minorities perhaps that you really have to what's it called? You have to like do the hard stuff. You have to like eat your vegetables before you get your dessert. So you have to, you know, be like a ninja 20 times before you can like, you know, have like a voice or like a producer role, or you have to feel as if you are like the token minority until you've proven yourself, right? And do you think that is like, from where you're standing, do you think that's changing at all? Do you think
slowly, but I do think, you know, I'm kind of talking about stereotypes, but in the past, conservative Asian families want their kids to take on maybe safe salary type jobs, but they don't necessarily tell their kids to become the CEOs. You know, like, be a lawyer or a doctor, but don't aim to be the CEO. And why not? Why aren't we telling our kids, be the boss of, you know, a multinational firm or something? So I would like to see more of those barriers shattered, and maybe it's a little bit of our risk averse nature, like take the risks. And entertainment it can be risky too. So take the risks in pitching stories, take the risks in aiming for something way beyond what you could dream of. I think that's really important too.
Yeah, and it's great that I think that there seems to be, perhaps you can confirm or deny, like it is like a safer environment for, you know, Asians and people of color to take these kinds of risks nowadays without just kind of being like shunned on sight.
Yeah. And I think it's your attitude too. Like, you go into a room and you act like you belong there and you deserve to be the boss or you deserve to lead. Act like that and people will believe you. It's how you got to have some swagger.
Right. Yeah, definitely. So yeah, I'm really interested in, you know, how the opportunity to tell Asian stories has changed over the years. Like, you know, I've mentioned earlier how it's really nice seeing just regular old people in TV who aren't like in a period piece or something. And so like I took the kind of safe route where I was a lawyer for many years, and then I was like, wait, I really enjoy drawing cartoons and maybe I should do that. And so I struggled a lot with making representative art, or, you know, telling my own story, because I felt like often it felt too political or like unrelatable, or that I was like kind of like shoving it into people's faces, for example. But I actually found that comedy, or like, you know, cartooning is a great way to tell stories that might otherwise be like feel like too much, or because I feel like people are too busy laughing to realize that they're consuming a diverse story. So I wanted to talk to you guys about, like, you know, your approaches to storytelling. And Lisa, specifically, I wanted to ask you, as a TV writer, as a movie writer, did you always set out to tell representative stories, or at what point did you feel you could like genuinely do so?
Yeah, I mean, to be honest, when I first started out in my TV writing career, I did not set out to tell representative stories because they didn't exist for Asian Americans. You know, when Fresh Off the Boat aired, it had been like a 20-year drought between All American Girl starring Margaret Cho back in, I think, 1994 and 1995, till Fresh Off the Boat premiered in, I think, around like 2015. And so Hollywood was telling me that there was a 20-year drought where they weren't interested in telling Asian American stories on broadcast television. Those opportunities weren't there. They weren't trying to tell these stories. So I started off my career thinking, hey, if I'm like, you know, lucky enough just to be able to tell other people's stories and like write jokes for like other people, then I'm really excited to do that. And that's been great. But until Fresh Off the Boat came along, I never like imagined that I would ever be telling stories from a Korean American perspective. I didn't think that anyone wanted to hear me pitching stories or like writing pilots about like the Korean American experience. And then Fresh Off the Boat happened, and I thought, oh my God, like this is happening in my lifetime. Like maybe someone's interested in hearing stories from like an Asian American perspective. And then Crazy Rich Asians happened, and that ended up being like a box office hit, a critically acclaimed hit. And then all of a sudden, like, you know, Hollywood wants like Asian American stories. And then, you know, Parasite ends up winning the Oscar and sweeping every major category. And I never thought I would see in my lifetime like a Korean language foreign film like winning at the Oscars or like even being nominated. And so then that, you know, led me to where I'm at now, where, you know, you had mentioned in my bio that this year I wrote Hallmark Channel's first Korean American led Christmas movie. And it's 2021, and Hallmark has not always had the best track record when it comes to diversity. And it's kind of wild to me that, you know, this was the first year where they had a female lead in one of their movies that featured someone who was fully ethnically Korean, which is just insane. And then also, you know, also features, you know, a man of color, like, you know, as a lead love male interest, and then a Korean Canadian stepmom, Susan Hansen, who's involved with the Vancouver Asian Film Festival, and then also, you know, your very own, like, you know, Paul Sun Hyung Lee from Kim's Convenience. And so it was just kind of amazing to be able to write a movie featuring a Korean American lead and a Korean American family, and having like Korean American cultural touches where, you know, people all across like the US and then also in Canada who have been watching Hallmark Christmas movies for years, they've never been able to see a Korean American family. And I think it's important because I want to be able to watch these movies and see my own face reflected back at me. I think, you know, when you talk about like all of the incidents of AAPI hate that have been happening over the past like year or two, it's really important to have like representation across the board, because it matters, because it helps to normalize people to other groups of people. And so for someone like who's in middle America flipping on the Hallmark Channel and seeing like, oh, hey, Korean Americans are just like us. They like to fall in love. Their hearts get broken. They like to celebrate Christmas. Like they like to drink hot cocoa. As small and as trite as that might sound, those things are important for people to realize that we have like more in common than we have differences.
Mm-hmm. For sure. Yeah. So that's all like, you know, amazing. I like me, you know, I have like a tradition where I pick a different Hallmark movie, different new Hallmark movie every year to sit down and enjoy. And so that is going to be mine this year. Absolutely.
Oh, good.
Yeah. I wanted to ask specifically about being a writer in writers' rooms in like the early 2000s, and like were there many people of color, like or women of color specifically, like in those rooms?
No, and especially like in comedy, you know, I've spent the majority of my career being on shows where I'm often the only woman in the room, in the writer's room, and I'm often the only woman plus person of color in the room. It's not always that way, but I'm always like in the minority, whether it's being like a woman or being a person of color. And I will say that now the current show that I'm working on, it's completely different. It's the first time that I've been on a show where the majority of the room is more balanced with minorities and with women. And the reason that that's the case is because the two bosses or the two showrunners on the show are two Asian American men. And so when you talk about like what needs to be done in order to start like, you know, increasing like representation and to be able to tell more diverse stories, you have to have more people that are like at the top and have the power to create change. And because we have like two people in charge who are people of color, and realize that like having all of these diverse voices in the room are really important, you know, that's why we have such a diverse room, because they have the power to be able to do that.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, for sure. One more specific question I had to ask was that Arrested Development and Always Sunny in Philadelphia are obviously two iconic shows from the early 2000s, and they also center a primarily white cast that are very racially insensitive, and I think that it's really just one of the most striking things about those shows is how the racism is like uncomfortably funny, and as like a person of color in that room, I mean, like I for one think that again, comedy is like kind of an interesting way to like shoehorn like racial, like racialized characters or like talking about race into places where they might not otherwise fit. And so, did you find that that was the case for you, or?
I'm sorry, what was specifically the case for me?
Oh, like whether you were able to like like whether you were able to write diversity into those shows at all, like using comedy or any other.
Yeah, I mean, I think that the landscape, like, when those shows were airing versus what it's like now, it's like kind of completely different. I think the more like you go back in time, like you'll find that that there were less boundaries, like in terms of like what was considered politically correct, what you could get away with in comedy, less attention paid to what might be racially or sexually or gender insensitive. And I think that those things have changed. Like, an interesting thing that happened after all of the racial upheaval after George Floyd last year is you found like a lot of shows like going back in time and saying like, oh, we're going to start pulling scenes that are like racially insensitive, like, incidents of blackface, like on certain shows, and anything that might be offensive. And it's kind of wild that like only like a few years ago that things like that were completely acceptable. And now people are looking back in retrospect and saying like, oh, wait a minute, maybe we shouldn't have done that. Let's hurry up and like kind of like course correct. And it's great that people are aware of it now. But, just to be honest, I think that like several years ago, that wasn't something that people were even concerned about or anything that was on anyone's radar. Like, oh my gosh, like who are we offending? And like, luckily we're in a different place now where more attention is being paid regarding like being more responsible with our comedy and the content that we put out.
Mm-hmm. It's interesting that you bring that up because I was looking for an episode of Community yesterday, and I Googled around and saw that it was pulled from Netflix because there was a scene with blackface in it, and I was like, wow, okay, so yeah, it is out there. Abu Bakr, I wanted to ask you about your storytelling as well, because you have this like really unique company, and I see that you're traveling to Pakistan and other countries and making all these stories from that perspective, and so how what was your kind of journey to deciding that these were the stories that you wanted to tell? And this is the way that you wanted to go about it.
First of all, I was going to say, just listening to everybody here, this has been phenomenal. I feel like I got some heavy hitters here, so I appreciate all the work that you've all done and the wisdom that you're sharing too. For myself, it was interesting. My family migrated to Canada in 1912, and so being fifth generation, I had a bit more of that. Hey, look, I'm an American and a Canadian. Okay. When someone would say, hey, go back to your country, as an example, just as a kid or just as a joke, like, well, I'm from here. And so I think that confidence that you were talking about earlier, Mijung, I think that's something that I've learned a lot throughout my life, is that if we have that confidence in our storytelling as well, it's not easy, first and foremost, to even know what our story is. That was a big thing for me. It was like, wait a minute, I'm an American and a Canadian. Okay, wait, I got to sit down with this. And wait, I'm Pakistani, but there was a partition. Where was I from before? Like it was hard. It was a lot of undigging of family trauma and like going to Pakistan, as you're saying, going to India, going and uncovering roots, which I was very privileged to do. But it was only once I kind of understood more of my history that I was able to have more of a grasp on, hey, what are the stories that I want to tell? So that was definitely interesting. And then we created that company, Diaspora Creative. And so that was all fine and great. But how I got into, I think, producing was similar to Aaron, where I was like, wait, I was acting. And then I remember realizing that I'm getting the written material at the end of the whole process. So I can say whatever I want to say, but I don't really have that power that, Lisa, you were saying earlier, like you don't have that leverage. So I think what I'm learning is that it's having confidence in our stories is crucial. Working together has been interesting as well with different people. So realizing that the business side is something that our community doesn't even know about, like having the financial literacy and knowing how financing structures work, and understanding that has been my journey now. That okay, creative is one thing, but I need to focus on the business side, because if I'm not there, then a lot of the stories won't get told. So yeah, that's been my journey, was understanding my roots, which was crucial. There's a quote that someone once said to me. They said, uh, "A person is not condemned to relive their history if they forget it. A person is condemned to forfeit it." And so after hearing that quote, I was like, all right, this is crucial. Let me understand my history. Let me figure that stuff out. And then now let me dive deeper into our stories. But where can I fit myself? I got to go on the executive business side. I have to focus on that side, because I'm finding, as I think Mijang, you were saying, we have a lot of faces now. It's funny, I'm rooming currently with a gentleman named Hamza Huck. He's in a show called Transplant out in Canada. And so he's one of the first Muslims like leads for a big procedural show in Canada. And we've been discussing it a lot of like, hey, that's a huge deal. But we also have been discussing how at the end of the day, if a majority of your rooms, not saying transplant, but just in general, your rooms are people that are not from your community, they do put their little bits inside the character and all of that. And so yeah, that's kind of where I'm really focusing now, is the business side and learning how to make projects happen, how to execute them. Um, and yeah, that's where I'm at.
That's awesome. Yeah, because like one recent example that comes to mind is the live action Mulan movie, which of course we were also excited for, and then it came out that like every single screenwriter was Caucasian, and then like created problems for how the movie came off, and I think there was like a lot of controversy around that. So yeah, like
Well,
having the like infrastructure in place that where there is just like a good environment for those kinds of stories to like flourish is awesome.
and I would just add this one thing that's been coming up a lot is, I know we're putting a lot of like, there's I'll give you an example at a festival I will not name. They spent an hour and a half on the first on opening night about indigenous communities, this and that. And they were an hour and a half. It was great. And then the movie plays, and it's like the electrical life of Louis Wayne, and it's about this guy that's drawing cats. Cool. The issue for me was when I watched this movie is that you had brown characters, but you knew they were written to be white people, and then they're like, what if we just make them brown? I was like, but then you're also eliminating, like, then he's not, but you're just eliminating who this whole person, that's a brown dude named Richard in whatever, the early 1900s. So that's where I'm kind of really pushing back on like, hey, just because you're putting people in, you're also erasing our culture or our history of that character. It's like, oh, this is Richard, he's a brown dude. So I really want to push back on, yeah, great, you're showing diverse faces, but I think as everyone here would understand, is it's a process of making that story, or it's the process of even raising the funding. All it's those processes that are going to lead to us being able to tell more authentic stories, compared to something like an Eternals, where it's like a Bollywood song and dance, and you're like, what is this? What is going on here? So
I mean,
yeah.
Chloe Zhao, right? Like she, the Oscar-winning Chinese director, I guess.
But I wonder, like on that though, Chloe Zhao, Oscar-winning Chinese director, but then the whole infrastructure around her. She's great. She's one person. I realized like, yo, that's one power person, but then you have the whole infrastructure around her making small little changes that I think they add up in the long term.
Yeah, definitely. Yeah, I haven't seen that movie. I think I've heard things to that effect, where it's kind of like, what is going on? There's like a lot of things kind of just like mishmashed together. Right. So that kind of goes into what I wanted to ask everybody next, which was the concept of like the authentic story. And so whether from your perspective there are barriers to like quality representation of Asians, and Asians taking ownership of their own stories, as opposed to like kind of just having a group of kind of very non-Asian people cobbling together a story that is like loosely about an Asian person, and then at the end of the day, you know, maybe it doesn't feel right for who's actually at the end of it, like portraying them, right? So, does anyone have thoughts about like what are the barriers that currently exist, or whether you've experienced these kinds of barriers to authentic storytelling?
Okay, well, can I start? I know my field is a little different, but we have one man, a reporter, who his name is Ben, and he is Indigenous, but he was raised mostly in foster homes. And most of his life, he never really acknowledged his Indigenous heritage. But finally, during the whole discovery of human remains at residential schools, it finally kind of was a turning point for him, and he wanted to come forward with his story about his past, and the fact that he wanted to accept his Indigenous identity. And I was talking to him about that, and to my news director, and those kind of stories, he only felt comfortable coming forward with that because he felt that our newsroom was a safe enough environment to be able to tell his story authentically. And maybe in the past, he hadn't felt that he could tell that story in a safe environment. So I think, you know, I'm in a more corporate setting. So from a corporate point of view, as we were talking about, the leaders, the powerful people, they have to create this environment of, yeah, we want to hear those stories. We want to hear those authentic stories. And then when you give people that feeling of safety, they have the confidence to come forward with those authentic stories. So, I mean, that's from a news perspective. It's maybe a little different from in movies and film, but I thought I'd just share that.
Yeah,
No,
yeah.
I think that definitely parallels our industry, and it goes back to what you're saying about, you know, the people at the top. There's still a gap, and that gap is the hurdle between telling authentic stories and not telling it authentically. And the problem is that, you know, they say, okay, we want to find someone who's going to tell an authentic story, but they also have to have, you know, it's kind of like how they talk about postings for jobs these days. They're like, look, we have this entry level job and we want you to have a master's degree. And it's like, well, you know, there's this gap. I can't fill that yet. But if you give me an opportunity, I can probably do this job really, really well. I just don't have that check mark that you're looking for. And, you know, that's kind of the big gap in the industry right now, where they're like, look, we want a seasoned writer who has this, and that to, you know, create this show. And it's like, well, we don't have that person yet. That person doesn't have that experience yet. Mm-hmm. And, you know, getting people in rooms, getting people produced, getting directors in the chair, you know, these are the steps that we're taking to help build that. But it's a slow, you know, it's not going to be an overnight thing, and that's totally fine. But I think what really needs to happen is the higher ups that aren't these diverse, you know, people to, you know, that's kind of when you have to start taking chances on people. And it's, and I get it from the business side. It's often a lot of money, and it's often a lot of time and resources. But there comes a point where if you want to tell a diverse story, if you want the next Crazy Rich Asians or the next Minari, you got to take a chance on someone. And it's proving that you take these chances and you're likely to strike gold, you know. So that's kind of the gap. It's definitely closing, and it's definitely filling in, and there's definitely, you know, people out there who are taking these chances and giving these opportunities. But like kind of a theme of this whole talk about longevity is really about finding ways to slowly inch forward and climb that ladder, fill that gap, and support others in the industry who are, you know, able to either come up and even people who aren't ready to get there, find ways to help them take the next step in their career, even if it's early, so that a few years down the road, you know, they're going to be able to help fill that gap.
What about the Squid Game buzz factor? Is that going to have an impact? I mean, that's not even in a North American story. This is a fully Korean show, and it's the #1 show in the world. So do you think that's going to have an impact too?
100%. It's and the great thing is, we had this whole conversation, and even Lisa brought up a list of shows, and none of us have even mentioned Squid Game yet.
Yeah.
And the more of these shows that we get to prove that you don't need A-list actors, you don't have to have the Hollywood model, you don't have to have those. You just have to have great content. And that's really what it comes down to. Parasite, perfect example. Minari, perfect example. Great content, great storytelling, giving creatives, the ability to be free and tell their story. Without, again, like you're talking about all these influences, get rid of those alls. Give the power to the storyteller. And that's one thing that we do when we produce our content is, we support the creative. That's the director, the script, and the actors. That's the most important thing to us, because that's where you find the most success.
Yeah, and I have to really second like everything that Aaron is saying, and just like in terms of breaking through, like more like Asian talent. I think that especially like in Hollywood, it's a creature of habit. And they want to kind of go to the writers that they're comfortable with, and the people who are proven hit makers, and the people that they're used to working with. And you don't end up giving that like Asian American or Asian Canadian or Asian writer like a chance to tell their own story. And then what you end up with is this idea of, similar to what Abu Bakr was saying, was that, with diversity, they think that it's enough. It doesn't matter who wrote the story. It doesn't matter if it's authentically told, as long as you're putting diverse faces like on the screen. Like, we checked off our diversity boxes and we did our job, because we're just showing you like, a rainbow of colors like on the screen. And, that's not like enough. Like, stories have to be told from an authentic point of view, like no matter like, what the ethnicity, like, of the characters are, who the story belongs to. And I think it's like also important, like, as well, when we talk about like, Asian representation, to realize that there is more than one way to be Asian. So like, even though we're seeing like Fresh Off the Boat, we also need shows like Aquafina's Nora from Queens, and we also need Parasite, and we also need Squid Game, because we're not just one thing. We're not just like model minorities. We're not just doctors and lawyers. Like, we're also like, all kinds of different things. And so I think it's really important to have, many like Asian voices telling these stories, because my experience is not the same as your experience. And so I think that that's like really important as well, just to show that, there's a wide range of experiences that make up what it means to be Asian.
Yeah, I agree with that. Of similar to South Asians, there's different shades of brown. But then what you end up doing is you're like, no, there's this one type of brown. And you're like, what's going on here? Squid Game did a much better job of just showcasing Ali Abdul, the one Pakistani character. But they did a good job of like they spent their time. That it wasn't rushed, and they wanted to do it properly, understand the nuances. So I love what everyone is saying here, because I think that when I'm finding that people are looking for stories, especially as Aaron said on the producing side, when you have people that just don't understand the nuances. I'll give you an example. At TIFF, I went to watch an Asghar Farhadi film. So I really enjoy Iranian cinema, because they have a bit more of these limitations due to Iran, and they don't have much of an American focus. So I remember that it was, again, a very authentic Iranian film, but it was so, as they say in film, it was so specific that it was universal as well. But I know that there was a few people that were, again, Caucasian that I was sitting with. There was a lot of things that just went over their head, which is totally fine. But does that give them, if they're in those positions of power, give them the right to be like, I didn't really vibe with that. Let's change up the journey a little bit here. Let's do a little bit of this so we can get you that funding. And that's kind of where I keep going back to, like, a lot of people of color creatives I spend time with, they have a hard time talking about money. And I think that's going back to Mijang's point of like, money is attracted to confidence as well. So that's where I'm like, if I can help a lot of these creatives realize, you'll get your money. There's a documentary I'd highly recommend everybody called The Black Godfather about Clarence Avant. So Clarence Avant was the gentleman basically that was helping the African Americans get their money. It's a great documentary, but you see how he was all about the numbers. And once you can control the financing side of it, understand how to speak that language, I think a lot more of our stories will be told, because our communities have an immense amount of buying power.
Yeah.
We have money. That is a big deal. So things are shifting at that end, and yeah.
Yeah, that's absolutely a thing. Because I mean, of course, like, whoever has the money gets to control the narrative at the end of the day, right? So yeah, just like having that like empowerment, like from like the bottom level. And you're right, like Asians are very averse to speaking about money and how much things cost. But of course, if you have funding, then you're able to make your own things. Um, are you able to speak to like is there any mentorship? Because I know that Aaron was talking about how like a lot of these times you just have to take risks on people because there's no Asian people in like the upper echelons for obvious reasons because they're like they've been selected out. And so are you seeing any mentorship? Are you doing any mentorship? Is that something that's and this would apply to all industries to like foster the people of color coming up?
Yeah, I mean, I would say that for anyone who might be watching who are US based, there are, and is interested in TV writing as well, there are various programs that you can apply to that focus on diverse writers breaking into the industry. CBS Networks does a diverse writers program, which is a fantastic program and actually like where I got my start in my career. Warner Brothers also does like a workshop. I don't know if it's only focused on diverse writers. CAPE, the Coalition of Asian Pacifics in Entertainment, they specifically do like a writers program and mentorship program for Asian Americans. And so I would just encourage anyone who is US based and interested in a television writing career just to do their research. Like a simple Google search would give them a list of all of the networks and studios that do these kinds of programs. I think ABC Disney does one as well. Again, I don't know if that's only for diverse writers or if it's just a wide net. But I would just say like do your due diligence, do the research, and apply to as many of these programs like as you can and take advantage of the mentorship that's out there.
Yeah, I agree with. I was gonna say that in Canada, we have the Canadian Media Producers Association, so they're doing a lot more diversity initiatives for sure, which is nice. There's also the program that I finished, which is the Canadian Film Center, and this year they had a lot of diverse people as directors, writers, actors, producers, and it's funny, but I think when you have a lot more diversity, your team is just so much greater, anyways. So that was a great, I think, thing that's happening. And yeah, I think you hit the nail on the head too, Lisa. That it's like getting in these good organizations that are finally starting to lower, I guess, their barriers of entry. However, I wanted to pose this to everybody here because this is a conversation I've been having with people: is what happens when they're just like, okay, we just want diverse people, and there's no, I guess, criteria either. It's like, oh, we'll take any brown person. So then the people that you're also getting you're like, oh, this person's not very good, but hey, they're brown. That's kind of what I'm wondering is like, do you feel like, hey, we need to have a bit of a balance as well? Like, don't just open it up to like, hey, everybody and anybody, because then a lot of the people that show up also aren't going to be like, hey, they aren't going to really be as interested or focused on it. They're just like, hey, this is a great thing to jump into. Do you think that is this a conversation that I would love perspective on? Of, do you think that is detrimental to us as Asians, South Asians, and the work that we're doing when it's like, hey, let's just let everybody in. Oh, and then they did that one film and it wasn't really good. Oh man, let's like kind of setting them up for failure. How do you all feel about that?
Yeah, well, I will say that like at least I can speak specifically to the TV industry side of things that, oftentimes on a show, like on a major network or major studio, they might have something that's called like a diversity staff writer position, which is the entry level like writer's position. And oftentimes that is a position that is subsidized by the studio or network. It doesn't come out of the production budget, and it incentivizes like a showrunner to hire like a person of color in order to have like more diversity on a staff. And I think that's something that's like very misleading about that. People often, look at that writer, and I was once upon a time like that writer on a show thinking like, oh, you're just a diversity staff writer. Like you're here to fill a quota. But I think what people don't realize is that like even to get that position, like it's still like ultra competitive. Like, you know, to staff on a show, it's like a game of musical chairs where when the music stops, there's only a handful of chairs and there are a ton of people like wanting a seat like in that chair. And I think that like, you know, because people think, you know, when you're a diverse person who's made it onto a writing staff or like gotten a particular job, that if you're filling a diversity quota, that you're probably not as good as like, you know, the person who's not a person of color sitting next to you. And so then what happens is you have to work twice as hard to like prove yourself that like I do belong here, I do deserve this like seat at the table. And I think that it's just like an unfortunate like, you know, misconception that just because like you're the one minority like who made it onto the staff, that like you must be substandard like compared to like everybody else.
And if I can just around that out with I find that then a lot of people that I meet like that in our community, they end up burning out because they're working, as you're saying, twice as hard. And then that longevity part that Aaron was saying, it's like, it's non-existent because they're just, and it's like, it'll take some time. Take a moment, focus on your mental health. Like we're in this for the long haul. Do you know what I mean? Where I feel like it's sometimes, it's like this cycle of like, then people are just like, I really tried to make this film, or I tried to be in this, but you know, it just took all of me. And that's kind of where I think it's like pushing more of our community to have that confidence, but also like, hey, let's rest up. We got a long journey ahead of us. You know, and we're in this together.
Well, and that's one of the things I tell a lot of the young people. It's like, you know, everyone, if filmmakers, whatever color you are, they all want to make their hit. They all want to hit the festival, and then they're the next, you know, Chloe Zhang. But it's like, you know, it's a long journey. Look at myself. Like I started 25 years ago or something, and it's like I set a goal, and I set a 10-year goal, and then I set a 5-year goal, and then, you know, like it takes time, and you have to be persistent. And, you know, for the film industry or the entertainment industry in general is not something where, you know, it's going to just get handed to you. And yes, that happens to people, but you are going to have to try to work twice as hard as everybody else. And you are going to have to get denied and denied and denied and get turned down and turned down and turned down. But it's how you pick yourself up and keep going. You know, for me, I always used all of the no's and all of the, you know, you can't do that. And especially the, oh, you're a stunt guy, you can't be a producer, you can't be a director, you know, you're not a writer, you don't know what you're doing. Oh, well, you know, now those are the people who are calling me and asking me for a job. You know, and that was my driving force, because I don't like to be told that I can't do something, you know, and I don't like being told, well, you know, there's not many Asian producers, and, you know, for whatever reason. And I'm like, no, there's going to be more now, because I'm going to be one. And now I'm fostering, you know, young filmmakers and producers who are going to come up after me. So when I'm too busy, you can hire, you know, the next person in line, kind of thing.
I think that's amazing, and that, you know, like it like, you know, good on you for sticking it out for this long in what is obviously like a very like competitive and seemingly unforgiving industry. I think that's fantastic. And I think that like this, we got a question from Barbara Lee, actually, which I think might round out this discussion really well and ties into this, which is that with, you know, if there's an industry that is still primarily white with a few Asians, with like, you know, a few POCs, there is the tendency for everyone to kind of fight with each other because there's like a scarcity mindset. So how do the people currently in the industry, in like, you know, journalism and in TV and film, how do you use your access to the industry to open doors to the next generation, and I guess ensure that future generations don't have to like fight over the scraps, and that there is, you know, enough spaces for everybody? And to tie into the rest of the discussion, how do we ensure that this period of representation, this golden era of Asian cinema, as it were, isn't just window dressing, that it isn't just temporary, that we can actually, you know, like have a foundation for this to be permanent and ongoing?
Yeah, I mean, go ahead, please.
No, you go first, Lisa.
Everyone is going to have a chance to answer, so yeah, go ahead.
Well, I was going to say that, like, in terms of like, you know, not pitting ourselves against each other, I know that like Hollywood can be like a very like vicious, like competitive industry to work in, but I will say, just at least for me, when it comes to my own experience, you know, with how I interact with other like, Asian Americans like in the industry, there are so few of us that we cling to each other and we need each other for the support. And we don't, there's not like a competitive nature. Instead, it's like a supportive, like, group of people where you need that kind of kinship with other people in this industry. I think in order to survive, in order to maintain your sanity, like other people that you can go to talk about a problem, to get a recommendation, to get like advice, to commiserate with, just be able to like have other people who understand like where you're coming from and what your experience may be like. So like I would just say, like I would encourage like other people who are coming up in the industry, like, surround yourselves with like, other people who are peers and mentors that are doing what you do, and look to foster like a community where you can lift each other up instead of tear each other down. And I think that's so important. Like I'm really lucky to have like a wonderful group of Asian American female writers that like, we're a part of like a support group, and we're able to go to each other for like advice and like recommendations. And it was crazy because before that, I only knew, like I could probably count like on one hand the number of like Asian American, like, women or men like in the writing industry, because I was often the only Asian person in the room. So I never got to meet like other Asian people because we were all like split up like in different, shows and jobs. And then, once this like group came together, it was just sort of like, the sea had parted and the lights were shining down. And it's like, oh my God, here are all these like, amazing, like, Asian American, like, female writers that I didn't, know existed, except for maybe seeing their credits like on TV here and there. And I think that like having that community is so like important, like, to the longevity of your career, to your own personal sanity and like emotional health. So I would just like encourage people to like create your own community of people that can support you.
Yeah, I agree with that. And I didn't really have a lot of mentors when I was young, and I really wish I had. So now that I am a veteran journalist, I really do try to make an effort to mentor the younger female reporters in our newsroom. And they are just so thankful. And it's really rewarding to see someone grow as a journalist because you've helped them here and there. So I find that really rewarding. So I would encourage, yes, young people getting into the industry to seek out networks like the Vancouver Asian Film Festival is a great place. My son is a young filmmaker. He went to some of the networking parties and he said, Mom, it was a really good vibe. It was a really supportive vibe. So, it's great that we have that ability to support each other and mentor each other and promote each other's projects. So I hope we can keep that vibe alive.
Erin, how about your thoughts on how we can sustain this going forward? You've already spoken a bunch about how you're working really hard to kind of bring up the next generation of producers, which is amazing. Do you have any other thoughts?
Yeah, it goes down to mentorship, and like Lisa's saying, there's a lot of great writing programs. There's a lot of producing programs, all these kind of things. VAF has a lot of great events and organization, these talks even and stuff. And, I did a talk that I was involved with MAM. And, for me, I'm always looking for the new talent. I'm always looking to see who's out there. But I'm also like Mi Jung, when I was up and coming, I had nobody to turn to. I had nobody to ask a question to or see, as a producer and a filmmaker, kind of what I was going through. So I've reached out to the local community, and I'm telling everyone here who's watching, like, reach out to me as if this was a networking event and you said, hi, my name is so-and-so, I'm a filmmaker. I'll have a virtual coffee with you, or maybe if we can even have a one in person, and I want to hear what you're doing. And if I can give you 5 minutes and a piece of advice that's going to point you in a direction that's going to save you a year or two, because again, it took me 20 years to get where I'm at. Well, if I can help you get here in 10 or 5 or whatever, I'm going to give you that time. And so that's kind of working with the up and coming people. But right now, what I'm also doing is talking to a lot of the more senior people in Canada. who are in places where they have the experience and they've done multiple shows in a room, or they've directed a couple of features, or they've directed a couple of, TV series and stuff like that, and say to them and bring them together. And that's the other thing with Canada, is that we're so spread out. There's Vancouver, there's Toronto, there's Montreal, and a lot of people don't know each other. And we're going through this similar thing that Lisa was talking about, where I'm finding a couple of female Asian writers and they don't know anybody else that exists, because there was never an opportunity to be in a room with each other. And there's some that are kind of connecting now, but there's a lot that just don't know each other. So, I'm just trying to connect people and say, hey, let's all do a Zoom and have a drink, get to know each other, and talk about, okay, this is the problems that we have in our industry. Us, as now the more senior experienced people, how do we give opportunities to others that we didn't have? And how do we band together and support each other when we need it? And, it's one of those things that I think is very great about kind of the Asian culture, is that we do support each other. When I came up as a stunt guy, I actually came up with two other Asian stunt guys who are the same size as me, same height as me, and, very similar skill set, martial arts, all that kind of stuff. And way back then, there was maybe 5 or 6 Asian stunt guys, and they got called for everything. And none of them liked each other. None of them really got along. And all of a sudden you get these 3, early 20s guys who hung out together, trained together, partied together, and made demo reels together. And everyone was like trying to pit us against each other. Oh, you can't support him. You can't hang out with him. He's going to steal your job. Well, our mentality was, well, if we all push each other and push each other, eventually we're going to get called, and I'm going to say, well, I'm not available. You can call Brian, and he's not available, and you can call Alex. And it worked out because we were the talent and we were the up and comers. Now, if we listened to the old guard and pushed each other down, we probably wouldn't have made it, and the old guard would have stayed the old guard. And that's kind of the mentality that I think that we all need, and a lot of people are embracing. Let's push each other forward. And as a producer, that's really your job, is to find talent, foster them, help them create and lift them, and hopefully they become Oscar winners and you get to go to the party.
Yeah, amazing. Abubakar, any last thoughts from you?
Aaron, I love that. I think that reminds me of just how sometimes we get so fixated on this Western idealism of individualism, whereas we have that Eastern, as you're saying, collectivism, which is so crucial, which is just like, hey, look, like we sit down, we drink chai together, we spend time, we have heart to hearts, like we're in this together. So I love that, and I think that to what you're saying too, of it's funny, but with in the South Asian community, I'm sure it's similar in the Asian community of it's like, yo, doctor, lawyer, engineer, and the joke I've been making lately has been it takes at least 10 years, but also an immense amount of resources, your family support, your community support to become a doctor. Same thing with this industry. It's going to require all of that to really to make it happen. And I think that's what I've learned to really appreciate and enjoy, is that we need that community care. Yes, self-care, we talked about earlier, but having that community care is what's going to keep us going, moving forward, and making better things together. And I'll end off with just like when I played basketball, that iron sharpens iron. When you have people that are getting better together, it's just everything is just so much more enjoyable. But also the content is so much better. And I think that's what we're really here to do, right? Is make people feel, and I don't know. I think that's my soapbox moment of like, love is the way. We the Eastern love. We got to use that. That's how we're gonna move forward.
Amazing, Kate. Like I feel very inspired. Thank you so much, all of you, for sharing your thoughts and your experience and your wisdom. I also really believe that like the way forward is to like just work tirelessly together and support each other, lift each other up. And then, the hope is that we will one day become like an unstoppable force and we won't be able to be ignored. So, I think we're at time now. I think so. I wanted to thank all of you again for coming and spending your energy and your time with us. I want to thank VAF, of course, for making this panel possible. I believe that this recording will be made available online. Yes, who wants to revisit portions of this video can go back later. Last but not least, this was also made possible by Eliminate Hate, and Eliminate Hate is going to be continuing this conversation in the months ahead. It's a really important conversation, so be sure to follow them on all their socials to keep abreast of all of their developments. So thank you, everybody, and I hope you have a wonderful evening.
Yeah, thank you.
Thanks, everybody.
We're already there. We're unstoppable. We got this.